Welcome to class. For those of you who are not with us today, might be in quarantine, or for those of you who'd like to go over a refresher of our lesson, this 15-minute presentation will do that. So today our lesson is going to be on literary panic, looking at rethinking. We talked about rethinking writing last week. We're going to shift back to rethinking reading today. And as you look at today's agenda, you can see that there are three things. Your academic notes, where we're talking about generating ideas for writing. We'll have a brief discussion on what you found out from your interview project. And finally, we'll get into our topic of rethinking reading. So this slide is a good reminder that a writer is an explorer, and even Ralph Waldo Emerson has to engage in pre-writing activities in order to get good stuff. The thing that this quote reminds me by Emerson is that we are not born a good writer, but we become good writers through work. And so there are lots of ways that we can come up with ideas to write about. And by the way, this information on these part of the slides will go into your academic notes. There's an article that you can click on the right-hand side of this page. Would you read it and record some information you learn about what to do if you get writer's block? The other thing, you can go through some of the lists that's on this infographic on this slide. One of the difference between coming up with ideas for a college class as compared to a high school class is how we need to be much more specific when we write for college classes. One of the ways to do that is to challenge old answers, like the first column, some examples that I have, and finally contribute new information to our world. And that's what people who write a thesis for a master's degree or dissertation for a doctoral degree or write scholarly journals. On the slide, I put an example of our United States presidential historian. Her name is Doris Kearns Goodwin. She was given the task to come up with a book about Abraham Lincoln. Well, you can just imagine so much out there that it would be hard to come up with something new. So her book that she actually published, it became a national bestseller. She took on the angle or the research for her book on all of the people who ran against Abraham Lincoln back in the late 1850s and early 60s, and how he brought them all onto his team. And so it's all about his cabinet members that were originally his opponents, and collectively all of their minds worked so well to help us get out of the Civil War. Another thing to think about with rethinking writing is it's just different than what you've done in high school. So I have some examples of students that appear in one of my textbooks that I have to teach this class, Insider Academics to Academic Writing. So you can look at what these three students say about how topics in college are different than those in high school, but because they are different, they are much more interesting to read. So to illustrate that, what I did is I went online a year ago and looked at the college application for Purdue University. And there were 4 types of prompts that students could write as part of their application process. And so I included them here. Most universities, not just Purdue, will have you recall a situation in life, like a reflection, some lesson you learn. But the thing you want to make sure that you don't do is write the same thing that everyone else does. Since when we apply to colleges and have to include that essay, we want our essay to be original and well thought of. So to illustrate that, I included one in your packet. This was written by a young lady who applied to several Ivy League schools along with Stanford. And she got into all of them. And she said that it wasn't that she was just the brightest person in the state or even in her school, but she wanted to come up with something original, and the colleges loved her application. So in your packet, would you find her essay? And it's so fun. It talks about going to Costco. So it will give you a good idea and a starting point, if you will, for when you guys are starting to write your college application essays later on this month. What we did in class today for the second part of class is have a discussion about different types of individuals and their careers and the types of writing that they do at work. So now I want to move into our lesson, Rethinking Reading. One of my favorite quotes is what I use all the time in this class and even in 2010. Read like a writer, write like a reader. The first part, read like a writer. So when we read, good writers do things to make the writing stand out. So as you're reading, pay attention to what writers are doing in their text so that you can emulate or use some of those strategies to write your own essays. Write like a reader. All of us have had to read something that another person has written that's glaringly filled with mistakes or vague or boring to read. So if we write with the idea of having to read what we write, I think it helps us to buy into the writing task a lot more. So read like a writer, write like a reader. On this slide, I want all of you to think about how you learn to read. And there is a video clip of learning a new skill that I included here for you to watch. And then we just had in class, we'll have a discussion on learning to read through sight or phonetics and whether or not you learned to read before you went to kindergarten or was it first grade, and what was it that finally made reading click for you. To illustrate, I used an example of my granddaughter, Lizzie, so that's why her name is on this slide. Another thing I want to point out is in our society today, we're sadly, even though we read a lot online, we're not reading literature in the same way, which is a scary thought, especially for new ideas and being connected to other generations of time and other people's voices. So this statistics shows you from Pew Research how much, unfortunately, we are not reading. So I wanted to take a minute and just have everybody talk about some of their favorite books. I included some examples here. In fact, there's a link to a list that I put together for you. And I think I copied this for you in your packet as well, some of my favorite books and why I enjoy them. So these are a couple of books that I read this summer, and both of them are on the contemporary book list. And I try to read something that is non-schoolish, if you will, in the summer, and I really enjoyed both of those books. In class, we walked around and answered some questions about reading and had a discussion on it as well. So if you're not here, make sure you look closely at some of the following slides. On this slide, there's another link to a Pressbook article about how we learn to read and remember, which is so important in a lot of your courses that you take online. You have to read big chapters and try to recall a lot of the information. So it shows you some strategies, what you can do. This infographic or this chart also does the same thing, and what types of reading you do in colleges compared to high school. In this one, it leads into some statistics of our, I guess, lack of preparing students to handle all of the reading that goes into taking classes on college campuses, and it's pretty scary. Another thing, this one talks about this concept of critical reading. Since in your college classes, and even in this class, when you are reading something, we're not reading novels in English 1010, but we will be reading scholarly journals. You will be accessing some for your research paper later on as well. There are different skills involved in reading those rather than just reading a tweet or something we follow online in social media. However, you can even look at a tweet like the one I included on this slide and critically think about what they're saying and how people interact with the statement. Here are some skills you can learn to ask questions within your head about a text, and you'll notice because it's an inverted triangle, they get much more specific as you go along. Here is an article on reading rhetorically. Reading, again, is like learning more about the writer before you pick up what they're asking you to read. Reading about the context or the time or where that person is coming from, age-wise, politically. All of those factors play into what a person writes in a scholarly article. And we also need to learn how to read visuals rhetorically as well, since many of the things that we look at today on college campuses are images as well. So make sure you pause on this slide to see when we're talking about reading and rhetoric or reading rhetorically, this interaction between reader, writing, and the text and the type of text, what's expected. So we're going to practice as part of your class assignment by reading a scholarly article. I picked something that ties into what this is actually a website that's tied to the university or Utah Valley College in Orem. And some of the professors, as well as community leaders and civic leaders, have gotten together for the past 10 years and talked about women and what has created a gap in their learning and their education and their leadership from college and beyond. So in your packet, there is an article that they started with in 2010, and then there is another one that I added that was one of many articles that they have worked on that topic that is more recent. So to practice reading complex text, then I want this to be an annotated exercise. So in your handouts that you will eventually turn in, pull out the 2 articles on Utah Women and Leadership Project. And as you're reading it, do some of the things that are on this slide, like what are some of the assumptions you're making? What kind of evidence did they use? How did the writer clarify an idea for you as a reader? What questions do you have that if you were to talk to the writer of the article, what would you say? So I want a text that's filled with notes on the side, which is what you will do as a college student. So that's our lesson. Good luck, and we will see you next time.